Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Allen. For many Canadians, their home represents their largest asset. It's where we spend most of our time, where we raise our families, and where we make our memories. But since the COVID lockdowns began over 1 year ago, however, the home has also become the place of work and sometimes schooling. This has created demand for more space, a larger home, and perhaps a larger property. While many initially thought that the real estate market would come toppling down with the lockdown, in fact, the exact opposite occurred. Urban areas such as Vancouver and Toronto are seeing skyrocketing sales and prices, and not enough supply to keep up with the demand. It seems many are moving up and moving out. But to many younger Canadians, home ownership still seems to be very much out of reach, with home prices in Toronto and Vancouver averaging over $1 million. The pandemic, however, has had the exact opposite effect on commercial real estate. Downtown cores, which were once bustling with activity, are now kind of like ghost towns, with office towers and skyscrapers sitting empty. Will working from home be the new normal? And if so, what will happen to those commercial properties? Will prices continue to climb, or will there be a cooling or a natural or government-induced cooling of the residential real estate market? Will young adults ever be able to break into the housing market? There's so much to discuss on the future of Canadian real estate, and joining me to help unpack it all is Rapp, CEO of Homebuilders Association Vancouver, and Jason Mercer, Chief Market Analyst for Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. Thank you, Ron and Jason, for joining me today. A very long overdue discussion, but a very necessary one. So I think to help frame the topic for our viewers, maybe we'll start with you, Ron. What was the state of the Vancouver real estate market prior to COVID starting?
Well, we had come off a peak in 2016, 2017 that was rivaling the sales levels and cost escalation that we're seeing now. But then, of course, when COVID hit, there was a contraction in the market. And even prior to that, with some of the government controls that were in fact introduced, a speculation tax, vacant home tax, all this sort of thing. And there was a cooling of the market to some degree. Prices fell off anywhere from about 10 to 30%, depending on what area you were in. But they started creeping back, and by 2019 they were starting to, recover some of that lost ground, if you will. Even though that those government controls did in fact introduce some more opportunity for renters into the marketplace. 2020 hit and COVID, and of course things dropped like a stone for, I would say, March and April of last year. But starting in June, we started seeing a recovery. And then that recovery built momentum, and then the momentum got crazy, and Here we are today.
Right.
So we are now seeing record levels of sales, together with very record levels of reduced availability as far as that goes. And that's
I want to get into those, and I want to get into what we're seeing with COVID in just a moment. But I want to ask Jason, just before we get into what things are now like with COVID, did Toronto have the same experience as Vancouver? Now, I know Vancouver, there were some, government measures to cool the whole housing market a few years ago. What was Toronto's experience prior to the COVID market, if you will?
I mean, it was a similar situation to what Ron just described. I will make the point, though, that, following the Fair Housing Plan that included a tax on foreign buying in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and then on top of that, we obviously saw the onset of the OSFI 2 percentage point stress test. That had caused certainly a lull in the marketplace between 2017 and I would say the midway through 2019. But what we had started to report from the summer onwards in 2019 and really the first quarter of 2020 up until, midway through March, was an accelerating pace of both home sales and home price growth in the GTA. And so we're already, based on consumer polling and just our regular forecasting that we do, looking at a very strong year for 2020, and ultimately that's what happened. That's what panned out. It's just that the trajectory of that was different. And just back to Ron's point, whereas we normally would have expected to see a strong spring, we kind of made up for it with very strong to record results in the summer and fall.
Yes, I recall seeing the news headlines, seeing the stats come out almost monthly because nobody could keep up with the just the skyrocketing numbers, and especially because, as I teased in our opener, that it sounds like people are sort of swelling outwards. They're going from the downtown core, swelling out to the outer regions of Toronto, Vancouver. Then that group is then uplifting and moving further out. We're going to continue this discussion though right when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. I'm joined again by Ron Rapp and Jason Mercer, and we're discussing the hot housing market, even in a post-COVID world. Again, just before commercial, we were discussing what the trends seem to be, that the market we thought might be suppressed with COVID, but now in the past year, we can see that prices are just continuing to climb. So I guess I'll ask you, Jason, what effect have you seen that COVID has had on the real estate market? And I guess a question I'd like to know is, are people actually leaving urban centers? Are they going elsewhere now?
Yeah, it's one of the stories that obviously has been recurring over the last year, and certainly, as we move through the summer and fall and we're setting consecutive record months. I mean, it was one of the themes that we were discussing, in the sense that, that both the sales growth and recovery in the marketplace, as well as the price growth we're seeing, was more pronounced in the region surrounding the city of Toronto, and particularly for low-rise home types, so single, semis, and townhomes by and large. So certainly that supported the argument that, you were seeing people, taking advantage of low interest rates once they're confident that their employment situation was going to remain on track. And looking to move perhaps into, a larger home or a larger lot, or what have you. And some consumer polling we did in conjunction with Ipsos at the end of the year supported that as well, where, we've been looking at buyer intention since 2015. And this is the first time over that period that we actually saw an uptick in buying intentions for detached homes. And that was at the expense of the condominium apartment segment. And so certainly, that again supported that trend. But I will say that, as we've moved through, the latter few months of 2020 and the first quarter of 2021, we have started to see a retightening, if you will, in the condominium apartment segment as well.
Okay. And obviously prices continue to climb. Vancouver is still the hottest real estate market in the country. It's the most expensive. The IMF has suggested, though, that the Canadian housing market is is overvalued, rather, specifically, again, in Vancouver and Toronto, which are the two most expensive urban centers. And they're suggesting that we are the most overvalued of home prices in the G7, which is quite the figure. Ron, would you suggest that they're correct in this statement, the IMF?
Well, I'm not an international monetary expert by any stretch of the imagination, but overvalue and a housing bubble, speculative adventures, that sort of thing has been applied to what's going on right now. But by the same token, we are seeing a lot of the sales taking place by real purchasers, people who are making decisions based on changing family needs, increased spaces, opportunity to move into ground-related products such as townhouses and single family because of the opportunities of being able to work remotely and that sort of thing. So there is a speculative element to it, but by the same token, it's the demand. The demand is staggering. And, quite frankly, we have been talking about a lack of supply for many years, and that has not come to any kind of resolution, in the sense that there has been no dramatic increase. And as long as opportunity and choices are curtailed, you're going to continue to see upward pressure. And the other factor that fits into the pricing equation right now as well is significant increases in hard costs, government-imposed charges, fees, et cetera, which make up a sizable component of the sale price of certainly new homes. Doesn't affect resale as much, but by the same token, those other factors are driving it as well. For the Vancouver area, and I'm not so much sure about Toronto, but the desire to live in this area is extremely high.
Right.
And at the same time, we are constrained with a border to the south, the ocean to the west, and mountains to the north. So there really is very limited opportunity for any expansion, and therefore the land component of our real estate is very high in proportion to the end price.
Yeah, it's very intense physically in the city of Vancouver. So. Just in the 45 seconds we have left before commercial, Ron, another factor that I've seen that is driving up the cost of specifically new home builds is the cost of lumber. It's gone triple. It's triple the price. How have your home builders responded to that?
Well, with great difficulty. We were just on a call earlier this morning. They were now talking about allocations and material shortages. I heard anecdotally about one builder telling me that his hard cost on a similar product from last year is up $50 a square foot. And
Wow.
a huge chunk of that is comprised in lumber, but it's not lumber alone. It's any resin associated product. So that's to say the resin that holds together panel goods like OSB and plywood, vinyl windows, et cetera, they're also putting pressure on the hard cost of housing. But lumber is definitely, it's roughly 3.5 times of where we were last year.
My goodness. Okay, we're going to continue this discussion right when we return. Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion on the Canadian real estate market, which has been so hot lately due to COVID. We thought it would suppress and contract. In fact, it's done quite the opposite. Jason, I want to discuss with you commercial buildings. Now, with more employees working from home for the foreseeable futures, we see a lot of office buildings now sitting empty. Will office buildings become obsolete going forward?
My sense is, and certainly we have a commercial network at the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board as well, and we just recently had a commercial forum, and some of what came out of that is that there's certainly going to be, I guess, a transition or a shift in how office work looks moving forward. And I mean, we've talked about people sort of moving to different parts of our region in the greater Golden Horseshoe in response to more flexibility. And I think that'll be the key word moving forward, is that people will be more flexible. But at the same time, what I'm hearing as well is there is at least some desire to be back in the office environment, at least for, part of the time. And so I think moving forward, there'll have to be more flexibility, and that'll probably be reflected in not only the amount of space that's required, but also, how that space is fitted out. And so that'll be important, but also looking at the commercial market more broadly. I mean, COVID-19 has also, I guess, sped up some of the shifts that we were already seeing. So the blurring of lines between, say, retail and industrial, because when you're thinking about retail purchases, now more so online, well, that also connects back to the need for more industrial space, for logistics, for warehousing,
right,
to allow for, more sort of hub and spoke networks and what have you, to allow for more frequent shipping and that. So it's not just the office environment that's sort of come under the microscope as a result of COVID-19, but also the blurring of lines between other sectors of commercial real estate as well.
Well, and I want to discuss that because we have seen so many small businesses close, restaurants as well, and with, as you mentioned, ramped up, need for hubs because people are doing a lot more online shopping. There's a need for more warehousing. Even with food delivery services, restaurants sort of become almost takeout centers, if you will. So what does this mean for commercial real estate if restaurants no longer need dine-in for the foreseeable future, or maybe that'll change, or for commercial retail enterprises saying, well, we can manage online going forward. We actually don't need that storefront space. How do you anticipate that impacting the real estate market, Jason?
Well, I think certainly, and maybe I'll focus in a little bit more on sort of the mom and pop side too, because there's, a lot of demand for more sort of neighborhood and avenue type of real estate as well, or has been in the past, and how those types of businesses have been impacted by COVID-19. And this sort of gets to the argument where on the one side, we're talking about, measures that could, say, slow down the housing market, especially when we're talking about interest rate and what have you, but it's a blunt instrument. So whereas on one side, the interest rate has been one factor that, obviously has fueled the demand for housing. On the other side, these low interest rates have also helped keep some of these businesses afloat. because people have been able to take advantage of much lower cost of borrowing, and that's helped them keep the doors open. And so I think that's going to be a real balancing act as we move forward. Whereas on the one side, the Bank of Canada will be concerned with inflation in general, and certainly inflation in consumer sectors like the housing market, but at the same side, not wanting to see interest rates move upwards too quickly when we're talking about commercial enterprises that can take advantage of low borrowing costs as they continue to move through recovery over the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And speaking of interest rates, of course, there's anticipation that they may rise. They haven't really, but there's anticipation that they will. Ron, what are your anticipations in terms of interest rates? Will it move, and how do you think that will impact the real estate market, especially for home builders?
It doesn't appear that there's going to be any significant changes in the rate, at least not for the short term. They are creeping up from the historic lows that we saw last year, but by the same token, the increase has been incremental, and I don't think necessarily has affected things. More to the point, it's the mortgage stress test that's being specified by the federal government, which I believe on the beginning of June will take on a higher threshold, and that's going to be the marker that in fact starts to affect people's buying power per se. And for all intents and purposes, it's probably going to reflect a difference on, say, $100,000 of somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10,000 per 100 in terms of what you can qualify for.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on the Canadian real estate market and what we can anticipate in the near future. It's ever so hot, but will it be cooled down artificially or naturally? We'll discuss that in a moment. Ron, just before we went to commercial break, we were discussing stress tests, and you said that there will be a change in the stress test come June. I think about first-time home buyers. I think about the young Canadians who are trying to get into the market, and now this seems the stress test will become even another hurdle for them to get in with the huge rates or a huge cost for getting into the real estate market. How do you practically see this impacting the young Canadians who just want to buy a home?
I don't think it's going to be the end of the world in terms of impact. And I think to some degree it's prudent because we know that interest rates are going to go up, and we don't want to see people taking on a debt burden that they can't deal with. By the same token, if someone is looking to get into the market, one of the things that's driving the heat of the market now is that savings are at record levels because people aren't doing anything. They're not traveling. They're not going out. They're actually in a position to, save some more of their disposable income. And if they can continue to do so, it gives them a much better chance of being able to, ratchet up that down payment that they can then apply to certain housing opportunities and to take advantage of the expansion or growth in the industry and, look to buy where you can afford. I mean, it's more important in some ways to get into the market than to be, have your perfect situation going in terms of a neighborhood you would like to live in or the amenities that you'd like to have access to.
Right. That's a good point. Buy where you can afford. That's always a good rule of thumb. So this is going to be a very doom and gloom question, Jason, but do you expect the market will crash? Do you expect it to cool down, the bubble to burst? What are your anticipations for the next year?
I think certainly short term. I mean, if you look at the level of demand that we're seeing right now, even if we, start to see the brakes put on a little bit, just because we're not seeing the type of population growth that we're used to as a result of COVID-19 and borders being closed. If you think about the Greater Toronto area, population on net grows because of immigration. And so obviously, we're expecting to see a real surge in immigration as we move into 2022 and beyond. That's part of the federal government's broader economic recovery package or plan. So that'll drive the demand for both ownership and rental housing, at least in the medium term. So, and certainly looking forward to the end of 2021, it just based on the level of momentum that we're seeing right now. I mean, we expect to see, 110,000 plus deals once we reach the end of calendar year 2021, which, will be one of the strongest years on record.
My goodness. And I'll ask this to both of you, and I think you've sort of answered this previously, Ron. But Jason, what measures, if any, do you think the government should take to cool the market?
Well, what I'd rather see is a concentration on sustaining an affordable market over the long term. I mean, you think about centers like the Greater Toronto area and the Greater Vancouver area. These are places that are known around the world and attract people from all around the world from different walks of life to take advantage of the diverse cultural base, to take advantage of the diverse economic base and opportunities that exist. And so, to remain competitive on the global stage, it's important to see an affordable housing stock, whether you're talking about ownership or rental. And the key to that is removing red tape and bringing more housing supply online, and not just housing supply in the aggregate, but also a greater diversity of housing. So in a given neighborhood, people can feel confident that if they purchase, say, a condominium apartment now, they're going to be able to move throughout the housing continuum over their lifetime. And that gives people more confidence, A, to purchase a home to begin with, and B, that they're going to be able to list their home and move up or down in the market as they see fit, and be able to find the type of housing that meets their needs.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what the government may or may not do in the months ahead, as, again, we're experiencing one of the best real estate seasons on record. Thank you both very much for joining me for this discussion.
Thank you.
Well, based on our discussion here, it sounds like the market is not going to slow down anytime soon. And what will that mean for first-time home buyers trying to get their foot into the market? Well, I think what you've heard earlier is the advice: buy where you can afford. Don't wait, buy where you can afford, and keep growing that equity. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.